The alarms tore through my shuttle before I even understood what they meant. One moment I was seated in silence, watching the stars slide past the viewport, and the next moment, the whole cabin shook so hard that my claws dug into the armrest without my permission. A voice crackled over the comm, fast and broken, saying words I did not want to hear. Impact. Aft compartment breached. Children on board. My children. I did not wait for the guards to move. I did not wait for anyone to explain. I was already on my feet, already pushing past bodies twice my size, already running down a corridor that suddenly felt 100 times longer than it had ever been. Every step felt like it took a year. My mind kept racing back to the moment I had strapped my 3 younglings into their seats before departure, how Dorothy had laughed at something her brother said, how Cale had complained about the tightness of his harness, how ordinary that moment had been. Ordinary moments are the ones you never expect to lose. The corridor lights flickered as I ran. Somewhere behind me, a guard shouted for me to stop, to let them go first, to protect me. I did not listen. A queen does not send others to check if her children are alive. A queen goes herself, no matter what waits on the other side. When I reached the aft compartment, the door was already torn open, twisted metal curling outward like the petals of some broken flower. Beyond it was space, black and endless, held back only by a shimmering film that should not have existed there. A cheap emergency membrane, stretched and patched, doing a job it was never designed to do. My heart stopped for a moment, because I expected the worst. I expected silence. I expected stillness. Instead, I heard my daughter's voice. Weak, but there. Dorothy was breathing, and she was talking, though her words were slurred with pain. My heart began beating again, faster this time, and I pushed forward through the wreckage until I saw them. All 3 of my children were lying on a makeshift bed of torn panel sheeting, arranged carefully so their limbs would not twist wrong. Their wounds, which should have been fatal in the vacuum of a breached hull, had been bound tightly with strips of fabric that did not belong to any medical kit I recognized. Cale's arm was wrapped in something that looked suspiciously like a uniform sleeve. Dorothy's leg was splinted with what appeared to be the handle of a cleaning tool, tied in place with strips of tape. It looked crude. It looked desperate. It looked impossibly like it was working. And kneeling beside them, hands stained with the deep blue of my daughter's blood, was a human. He wore the plain gray uniform of station maintenance staff, the kind of uniform that made a person invisible to most eyes in my empire. A small tag on his chest read, Daniel Whitfield. He did not look up right away. He was pressing 2 fingers against my son's throat, counting silently, his lips moving as he tracked the rhythm of a heartbeat that was not his own species' heartbeat, that beat in a pattern no human medical training would have prepared him for. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I had spent 3 centuries hearing about humans in briefings that painted them as unstable, as violent, as a species best kept at arm's length and behind locked doors. I had never once imagined finding one kneeling in the wreckage of my shuttle, covered in my children's blood, working to keep them alive. He finally looked up at me, and there was no fear in his eyes. No awe either, which surprised me even more. Only urgency. Ma'am, he said, his voice steady despite everything around him. I need you to stay back for a moment. I need the light behind me clear so I can see what I am doing. And if you have anyone trained in real medicine on this station, I need them here immediately, because I only know enough to slow the bleeding down, not enough to fix whatever is happening to her leg. I did not move, not out of defiance, but because my legs would not obey me. A queen does not take orders. A queen has never in my lifetime been ordered to do anything by anyone, let alone a member of a labor caste holding a mop that lay discarded against the wall a few feet away, still slick with cleaning solution, as if he had dropped it mid-task the moment the alarms sounded. But I stepped aside anyway, because the fear in me was greater than my pride. Behind me, my guards finally arrived, weapons drawn, ready to defend me from a threat that did not exist. I raised a hand, and they stopped in their tracks, confused, watching as their queen stood protectively over a human janitor, instead of away from him. Dorothy's breathing hitched, and my hearts clenched painfully. Daniel noticed immediately, adjusting the pressure on her leg, speaking to her in a calm, low voice that I did not expect from someone I had been told my whole life was incapable of gentleness. "You are doing great," he told her. "Just keep breathing the way we practiced. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. You remember?" Dorothy nodded weakly, her small mandibles trembling, and she began to breathe the way he had taught her, in the middle of a crisis, in the wreckage of a ship, surrounded by strangers of a species that had never shown her kindness before that day. I realized then that he had been talking to her since the moment the breach happened. He had been coaching a frightened child through pain and fear, using nothing but his voice and his presence, while doing everything else with his hands at the same time. Medical staff arrived moments later, rushing past me with equipment and stretchers, and Daniel finally stepped back, letting them take over. He wiped his hands on his uniform, leaving streaks of blue against the gray fabric, and for the first time since I had arrived, he looked tired. Not proud. Not satisfied, just tired, the way anyone looks after giving everything they have to a task that mattered. I watched the medics lift my children carefully onto stretchers. Cale's eyes fluttered open briefly, and he looked toward Daniel with something like gratitude before the pain pulled him back under. Dorothy reached out a small claw toward the human as they carried her past, and he gently touched it with 2 fingers. A small gesture that meant more to me in that moment than any diplomatic ceremony I had ever witnessed. It was only after they were gone, after the corridor had emptied of medics and stretchers, and the immediate danger had passed, that I finally turned to face him fully. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He shrugged, an oddly casual gesture given everything that had just happened. "Daniel," he said. "I clean the maintenance decks on this side of the station. I was mopping near the docking bay when I heard the impact. Figured someone might need help." "Figured someone might need help," I repeated slowly, testing the words, as though they might reveal some hidden meaning I was missing. "You ran toward a hull breach because you figured someone might need help." He nodded, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. "Yeah, that is usually how it works." I stared at him for a long moment, trying to reconcile the calm, almost embarrassed man standing in front of me with the reports I had read for years, reports that described his species as dangerous, unpredictable, difficult to control, a species that fought wars among themselves with a ferocity that made older civilizations uneasy. Nowhere in those endless pages of analysis had anyone mentioned that this same species would run, without hesitation, into danger for strangers who were not even their own kind. I asked him to walk with me, and to my surprise, he agreed without any of the nervous formality I was used to from members of client species in my presence. We walked slowly through the damaged corridor, past workers already beginning repairs, past guards who still eyed him with suspicion they did not bother to hide. "Tell me something," I said. "My advisors have spent years telling me that your people are too unstable for real diplomatic contact. Too aggressive, too unpredictable, and yet here you are, calm as still water, having just spent the last hour keeping 3 alien children alive with nothing but a mop handle and some tape." Daniel laughed, a short, surprised sound. "I do not know about unstable," he said. "I just know that when someone is hurt, you help them. That is not really a complicated idea where I come from." "It is a complicated idea most places," I told him honestly. "Most species I know would have waited for trained medical staff. Most would have avoided the risk entirely, especially for children of a species not their own." He considered this for a moment, and I could see him genuinely trying to understand why the concept confused me so much. "Where I am from," he said finally, "we get taught pretty early that if you can help, you help. Doesn't matter who it is, doesn't matter what they look like or where they are from. If they are hurt and you can do something about it, you do something about it. Standing around and waiting just means more time for things to get worse." I thought about the countless briefings I had sat through, the endless committee meetings debating whether humans should be allowed further into our territories, whether their unpredictable nature made them a threat that needed to be managed rather than understood. Not once had anyone suggested that the unpredictability my empire feared might actually be this. Not violence, not chaos, just an overwhelming, immediate instinct to protect anyone who needed protecting, regardless of the cost to themselves. We reached the observation deck, where the wreckage of my shuttle was still visible through the reinforced glass. drifting slightly as repair crews worked around it. Daniel stood beside me, watching the stars beyond the debris, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "Can I ask you something?" he said eventually. "Of course," I replied. "Are they going to be all right? Your kids, I mean." The question caught me off guard, not because it was strange, but because of how simply and sincerely he asked it. There was no political calculation in his voice, no attempt to gain favor or advantage. He was asking because he genuinely wanted to know, because some part of him remained attached to the outcome of children he had only known for a matter of minutes. "The medical team believes they will make a full recovery," I told him. "Dorothy's leg will need regeneration treatment, but that is a simple procedure with modern technology. Kale's injuries were less severe than they appeared. And Vess, my eldest, was fortunate enough to be shielded by the others during the impact." Daniel exhaled slowly, visible relief spreading across his face. "Good," he said. "That is really good." I studied him carefully, searching for any sign of performance, any hint that his relief was calculated for my benefit. I found none. It was simply relief, honest and uncomplicated, the kind that comes from genuinely caring about the well-being of another living creature. "I want to give you something," I said. "A reward. A title, perhaps, or a position within my court. Something that reflects what you did today." He shook his head immediately, and the speed of his refusal surprised me almost as much as everything else about him had. "I appreciate that," he said, "but I do not really need a title. I like my job. I like fixing things and cleaning things, and making the station run smoothly. If you really want to do something, maybe just make sure the emergency kits on transport shuttles actually have proper supplies in them." I had to use my mop handle as a splint because there was nothing else around. The simplicity of his request struck me harder than any grand gesture could have. He had just saved the lives of 3 children who would one day inherit positions of great power in my empire, and all he asked for in return was better safety equipment for future emergencies, so that no one else would need to improvise the way he had. I promised him that his request would be honored, and it was. Within a month, every transport shuttle in my fleet carried updated emergency supplies, standardized and thorough, designed to prevent anyone from ever needing to rely on a mop handle again. But I could not simply let his actions go unrecognized, regardless of his wishes. I offered him something smaller instead, something he could not easily refuse. I asked him to visit my children during their recovery, so they could properly thank the person who had saved them. He agreed, somewhat reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, but unwilling to deny 3 recovering children the chance to express their gratitude. The visit changed something in me that I had not expected. I watched him sit beside Dorothy's medical bed, listening patiently as she asked him question after question about human customs, about his life on the station, about why he had not been afraid when the alarms sounded. He answered each question honestly, without exaggeration, without trying to make himself sound braver or more important than he believed himself to be. "Weren't you scared?" Dorothy asked him at one point, her voice still weak but curious. Daniel thought about the question seriously before answering. "A little," he admitted, "but being scared does not really stop you from doing what needs doing. It just makes it harder. You feel the fear, and you do the thing anyway." Dorothy considered this for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as though filing the information away for later use. "I want to be brave like that when I grow up," she said. "I do not know about brave," Daniel replied with a small smile. "I just did not want to leave you all alone out there. That is all it really was." Watching that exchange, I understood something about humans that no briefing document had ever managed to explain. Their courage was not the calculated, weighed bravery my culture valued and celebrated, the kind of courage displayed in ceremonies and recorded in official histories. It was something quieter, more immediate, almost reflexive. It did not ask for recognition. It did not wait for permission. It simply acted, because someone needed help, and helping was the only acceptable response. Over the following weeks, I found myself returning to that observation deck more often than I probably should have, thinking about the conversation Daniel and I had shared there. I began reviewing old reports about human behavior with new eyes, searching for patterns I had previously ignored or misunderstood. I found accounts of humans risking themselves to help members of other species during accidents, disasters, and emergencies, across dozens of different star systems. I found records of human relief workers traveling to conflict zones, not of their own making, simply to assist populations they had no obligation to help. I found pattern after pattern of behavior that my empire had spent years labeling as reckless or unpredictable, when in truth, it was simply compassion, acting without hesitation. My advisors, when I brought this new perspective to them, remained skeptical. Centuries of caution do not disappear because of a single incident, they argued, and perhaps they were right to be cautious. But I could not unsee what I had witnessed. I could not forget the sight of a stranger kneeling in the wreckage of my shuttle, working desperately to save children who were not his own, expecting nothing in return. Before Daniel returned to his regular duties on the maintenance deck, I asked him one final question. "What would you have done?" I asked, "if the children in that wreckage had belonged to a species you had never encountered before, a species that looked nothing like anything you had ever seen, that might have even seemed frightening to you?" He answered without hesitation, exactly as I expected him to by that point. "Same thing," he said simply. "Doesn't really matter what they look like. Hurt is hurt. Scared is scared. If I can help, I help." I have kept that answer with me ever since, carrying it into every meeting, every negotiation, every decision my empire has made regarding humanity in the years that followed. I directed my court to reconsider the old policies that kept humans at arm's length, the ones built on fear and misunderstanding, rather than genuine knowledge. It was not an easy process, and resistance remained strong among those who preferred the comfort of old assumptions. But slowly, carefully, things began to change. One advisor in particular, an elder statesman named Corin, who had served 3 previous queens before me, remained the loudest voice against any change in policy. He had built his entire career on careful distance from unfamiliar species, and he saw my growing trust in Daniel as a dangerous departure from tradition. I invited him to the medical wing during Dorothy's recovery, hoping he might witness for himself what I had witnessed. He watched silently from the doorway as Daniel helped Dorothy practice walking again, steadying her arm without being asked, adjusting his pace to match her uncertain steps, offering quiet encouragement with every attempt. Corin said nothing that day, but weeks later, during a formal council session, he was the one who proposed easing the restrictions on human workers stationed within our territories. When I asked him privately what had changed his mind, he simply said that some truths were easier to argue against than to witness in person. Once witnessed, they could not be unseen. News of the incident eventually spread beyond our own territories, carried by traders and diplomats who found the story too remarkable to keep quiet. Other rulers began asking questions about the humans stationed on my outpost, curious whether his actions represented something unusual or something common among his kind. I answered honestly every time. I told them what I had learned, that humans seemed to carry an instinct toward helping others that ran deeper than politics, deeper than fear, deeper than the careful calculations most civilizations made before offering assistance to strangers. Some listened with genuine interest. Others dismissed it as a single fortunate exception, insisting that one janitor's actions could not possibly represent an entire species. I understood their doubt, because I had once shared it myself, before I stood in that wrecked corridor and saw the truth with my own eyes. Daniel never accepted the title I offered him, and he never sought recognition for what he had done that day. He continued working on the maintenance deck, mopping floors and repairing equipment, largely unnoticed by the thousands of travelers who passed through the station every cycle. But my children never forgot him. Dorothy, in particular, grew up asking about him constantly, eventually requesting that he be present at her coming-of-age ceremony, an honor typically reserved for close family and trusted advisors. He attended, uncomfortable in the formal setting, but present nonetheless, standing quietly near the back of the hall while my daughter accepted her new responsibilities. Years later, when Dorothy eventually took a position advising on relations between our empire and the human worlds, she often spoke of that day in the wreckage as the moment her understanding of the universe truly began to shift. She would tell anyone who asked that the greatest lesson of her life came not from a teacher or a diplomat, but from a janitor with a mop handle and a steady voice, who taught her that courage does not always look the way you expect it to. As for me, I still think about that corridor sometimes, about the fear that gripped me as I ran toward the wreckage, certain I would find only tragedy waiting for me. Instead, I found something far more valuable than the survival of my children, though that alone would have been enough. I found proof that the universe still held surprises, that entire species could be misunderstood for centuries, simply because no one had taken the time to truly look, and that sometimes the most important lessons arrive wearing the plainest possible uniform, holding nothing more impressive than a cleaning tool, asking for nothing in return except the chance to help. Every report my court sends out now regarding humanity carries a small addition at the very top, written in my own hand, above all the careful diplomatic language my advisors still prefer to use. It reads simply, "They will help you before they ask who you are. Plan accordingly, and be grateful that they do."